Imagine standing in a desert thousands of years ago, surrounded by thousands of people. There is no river nearby, no rain is falling, and somehow everyone has water. That sounds impossible. But ancient cities solved this problem long before modern plumbing. They dug channels. They built wells. They carved tunnels through mountains. They raised water over walls. And sometimes they moved entire rivers. The strange part is not that ancient people understood water. They had to. The strange part is that entire civilizations depended on controlling something they could never truly own: water. A city can survive without gold. It can survive without roads. It can even survive without walls. But without reliable water, a city is just a temporary gathering of thirsty people. So the first great cities faced a problem that looked simple. How do you make water appear exactly where humans need it? The answer changed civilization forever. Around 3000 BC, people living in ancient Mesopotamia began building enormous irrigation systems. Mesopotamia means land between rivers. Those rivers were the Tigris and Euphrates. They carried life through an otherwise difficult landscape. But rivers are unpredictable. They flood. They dry. They change course. So ancient farmers began cutting channels through the earth. Water could now travel away from the river. It could reach fields. It could reach settlements. It could feed crops far from the natural riverbank. This was more than farming technology. It was the beginning of organized water management. And organized water management created a new kind of power.
Imagine controlling the water supply for an entire community. Who decides where the water goes? Who repairs the canals? Who measures the fields? Who settles arguments when two farmers need the same water? Suddenly, someone has to organize everything. That someone needs workers, officials, rules, records, and eventually, writing. This is one reason historians connect irrigation with the rise of early states. Water created a problem. The problem created organization. Organization created administration. And administration helped create civilization. But Mesopotamia was not the only place where humans learned this lesson. Thousands of kilometers away, another civilization faced a different water problem: Egypt. Egypt depended on the Nile. Every year, the river flooded. The flood brought fertile soil. Then, the water disappeared. Farmers needed to know when the flood would arrive. They needed to measure land after the flood. And they needed to distribute water across fields. This required calendars, surveying, mathematics, and government. The river was the center of everything. But eventually, humans wanted something even more difficult. They wanted water to move uphill. That sounds ridiculous. Water flows downhill. Everyone knows that. But ancient engineers found ways around the problem. One invention was the shadoof. It was a simple lifting device. A long wooden pole balanced on a pivot. One end held a bucket. The other end held a counterweight. A person could lower the bucket,
fill it, then raise it. The water could be poured into a higher channel, one bucket at a time. It was slow, but it worked. And sometimes slow technology changes the world because it works reliably. The Romans took water engineering much further. They built aqueducts. Some crossed valleys on enormous stone arches. Others ran underground. The basic idea was surprisingly simple. Use gravity. Build a channel with a very gentle downward slope. Then let water flow. No electric pumps, no engines, just careful engineering. The famous Aqua Appia was completed in 312 BC. It supplied water to Rome. Later aqueducts carried water across enormous distances. The Aqua Claudia, completed in AD 52, stretched for roughly 69 kilometers. Some of its water traveled underground. Some crossed the landscape on towering arches. Think about that. A city of hundreds of thousands of people could receive fresh water from miles away. But why build something so enormous? Because water was not just for drinking. It filled fountains. It supplied baths. It supported gardens. It helped remove waste. It became part of daily life. The Roman city was increasingly built around water, and water became a symbol of power. If a ruler could bring water into a city, people could see the result. The monument was not just a statue, it was a fountain. The message was simple: we control the water. But the Romans were not the only ancient engineers to master this problem. In Persia, engineers developed an extraordinary underground technology. It was called the qanat. Imagine standing on a dry plain. There is almost no surface water. But beneath the ground, mountain snow has slowly melted. The water is there, you just need to reach it. Persian engineers dug a vertical shaft into the ground, then another and another. Eventually, they connected the shafts with a gently sloping underground tunnel. Water could flow downhill. Entire communities could receive water without relying on rivers. The surface could remain dry. The water could travel hidden beneath it. Qanats spread across parts of the Middle East and beyond. Some remained in use for centuries. The technology was simple in concept, but incredibly difficult to build. Workers had to dig underground without modern machinery. They had to calculate direction. They had to maintain the correct slope. They had to prevent tunnels from collapsing, and they had to keep the water flowing. One mistake could ruin the entire system. So what happens when a civilization becomes dependent on a technology this complicated? It becomes dependent on the people who understand it. Water engineers become important. Surveyors become important. Administrators become important. Knowledge itself becomes a form of power. And that pattern appears again and again throughout history. In ancient China, engineers developed massive systems for controlling rivers and floods. The Duzhiyang irrigation system was constructed around 256 BC. Instead of simply building a giant dam, engineers redirected water through a carefully designed network. The system helped control flooding. It also supplied irrigation, and remarkably, parts of it still function today. That is the strange thing about ancient infrastructure. We often imagine ancient technology as primitive, but primitive does not mean simple. A society without computers can still solve incredibly complex problems. It just solves them differently, with stone, wood, rope, mathematics, and thousands of human hands. Water infrastructure also changed the geography of human settlement. People no longer had to live directly beside natural rivers. They could settle where engineering made water available. That changed deserts. It changed valleys. It changed cities. And it changed the limits of civilization itself. Consider a place like Petra. The ancient city was built in a landscape that looks almost hostile to permanent settlement. Rocky cliffs, dry valleys, limited rainfall. Yet people lived there, they traded there, they built monumental architecture there. How? Water management. The Nabateans constructed channels, reservoirs, dams, and cisterns. They captured seasonal rainfall. They stored it, they protected it, they distributed it. The city was not surviving despite the desert, it was surviving because people had learned to outthink the desert. And this raises a strange question. Was civilization really built around food, or was it built around water? Food feeds people, but water makes food possible. Water determines where crops grow. Water determines where animals can live. Water determines where people can settle. And once people settle permanently, everything else follows. Homes, markets, temples, governments, civilization. The modern city still follows the same ancient rule. We just hide the machinery. You turn a faucet, water appears. You flush a toilet, waste disappears. You rarely think about the system underneath. But beneath every modern city is an enormous network of pipes, pumps,
reservoirs, treatment plants, and tunnels. The technology changed, the problem did not. We still have to answer the same ancient question. How do you bring water to millions of people who do not live beside a river? The answer is still engineering. But there is another lesson hidden in these ancient systems. Water infrastructure can create stability, but it can also create vulnerability. If a city depends on one river, one canal, or one aqueduct, that system becomes a weakness. Break the infrastructure, interrupt the supply, the city suffers. History contains many examples of societies struggling when their environmental systems failed. Drought, floods, salinization, war, climate changes. Sometimes the problem was not one disaster, it was a slow accumulation of small failures. A canal becomes clogged, a river changes course, soil becomes salty, harvests decline, people leave, the city weakens. The lesson is uncomfortable. Civilizations can look permanent while depending on systems that are incredibly fragile. Ancient engineers understood something we sometimes forget. Infrastructure is civilization. Not the palace, not the crown, not the monument. The invisible systems that keep ordinary people alive. The canals, the wells, the reservoirs, the tunnels, the pipes. These are the things that make a city possible. A city is not really a collection of buildings. It is a machine for concentrating human life, and water is the first thing that machine needs. That is why some of the oldest cities appeared near rivers. That is why engineers became powerful. That is why rulers invested in canals and aqueducts. And that is why ancient water systems can tell us something profound about civilization itself. Humans did not conquer nature, we negotiated with it. We studied its patterns, we accepted its limits, then we built systems that worked within them. The greatest ancient cities were not powerful because they had the biggest walls. They were powerful because they could make water travel. And once water could travel, humans could travel farther. They could build farther. They could grow farther. They could imagine cities where nature never intended them to exist. The technology that made cities possible was never really about water. It was about turning an unpredictable world into something humans could depend on. And perhaps that's what civilization has always been. Not our escape from nature, but our endless attempt to build a bridge between what nature gives us and what humans need.